Hey everyone, welcome back to Steve's View. All right, let's talk about something that doesn't look dramatic at first glance, but might actually tell us a lot about where American politics is headed. In this election cycle, an unusually high number of members of Congress have decided not to run for re-election. Dozens of House members, several senators, Republicans and Democrats. Not after losing, not after scandal, just walking away. Now on the surface, that might not sound shocking. Politicians retire, people move on. That's normal. But when you start looking at the scale, and more importantly, the pattern, a bigger question emerges. Why is Congress losing so many career lawmakers? And even more importantly, is Congress slowly losing the kind of people who used to treat politics as a long-term profession? Because what we may be witnessing isn't just turnover. It may be a structural shift in who wants to do this job and who doesn't anymore. For decades, serving in Congress was seen as the pinnacle of a political career. You worked your way up, city council, state legislature, maybe a statewide office, and eventually, if you were ambitious and successful enough, you landed in Washington. And once you got there, many members stayed. 10 years, 15, 20. Some made entire careers out of mastering committee rules, building relationships, writing legislation, negotiating compromises. They weren't always charismatic, they weren't always famous, but they knew how the institution worked. That type of lawmaker, the institutionalist, the policy-focused workhorse, used to be common today. That model looks increasingly fragile. Let's start with the most obvious explanation: polarization. Congress today is far more polarized than it was in the 1990s or early 2000s. The ideological overlap between the two parties has largely disappeared. Moderate Republicans are rare. Conservative Democrats are rare. The middle has thinned out, and when the middle thins out, governing becomes harder. Major legislation becomes more difficult to pass. Compromise becomes politically risky. Crossing party lines can trigger primary challenges. Every vote becomes a loyalty test. For a lawmaker who entered politics to draft policy and solve problems, that environment can be exhausting. If you spend most of your time fundraising, messaging, defending yourself from partisan attacks, and navigating social media storms, when exactly are you doing the job you thought you signed up for? But polarization alone doesn't explain the retirement wave. After all, Congress has had contentious eras before. The Vietnam War period, Watergate, the Reagan years. Politics has never been calm. What's different now is the intensity and the personal cost. We are living in the age of social media politics. Every vote, every speech, every offhand comment can be clipped, edited, amplified, and turned into a viral outrage cycle within minutes. Members of Congress are no longer just legislators. They are content subjects in a 24/7 digital arena. And it's not just criticism, it's harassment, it's threats, it's doxing. Lawmakers and their families increasingly face security concerns. Children get dragged into online attacks. Home addresses get exposed. The line between political disagreement and personal hostility has blurred. If you are a parent, if you have young kids, if you have elderly parents, at some point you have to ask, is this worth it? Serving in Congress used to mean long hours and public scrutiny. Now it can mean living under constant digital siege. That changes the calculus. Then there's the internal transformation of the parties themselves. On the Republican side, the rise of the America First movement reshaped the party's identity. Loyalty to President Donald Trump became a defining marker for many voters. Some long-serving Republicans found themselves out of step with the new energy of the base. Rather than fight bruising primaries or adapt to a style of politics that felt foreign, some chose to step aside. On the Democratic side, a similar shift has been unfolding. A more progressive wing has grown in influence, especially in urban districts and among younger voters. Established centrists sometimes find themselves squeezed between activist pressure on the left and competitive general elections in swing districts. When parties realign, they create both opportunity and discomfort. New voices rise. Old guard figures reconsider their future. So when we see veteran lawmakers retire, it's not always about age. Sometimes it's about ideological climate. The party they joined 20 years ago isn't the party they're serving in today. There's also a generational shift in what political ambition looks like. In the past, climbing the ranks in Congress meant accumulating seniority. Committee assignments mattered. Relationships mattered. Institutional memory mattered. You built influence over time. Today, influence can be built online. A freshman member with a large social media following can shape the national conversation faster than a 20-year veteran who quietly chairs a subcommittee. Cable news bookings, podcast appearances, viral clips. These can elevate a lawmaker's profile overnight. This doesn't mean new members are less serious, but it does mean the incentives have changed. If attention is power, then the skill set required to thrive in Congress has shifted. Media savvy can matter as much as legislative expertise. Confrontation can generate more visibility than compromise. For traditional policy-first lawmakers, that environment can feel alien. If your strength is negotiating behind closed doors, but the political reward system now favors public confrontation, you may feel out of sync with the times. And then there's the financial dimension, a topic that rarely gets discussed honestly. Members of Congress earn a solid salary by national standards, but it's modest compared to what many could make in the private sector, especially after building a network in Washington. After years of service, former lawmakers can write books, join corporate boards, work in consulting, join think tanks, or take executive roles. The earning potential can multiply. If you're facing constant political stress, increasing security costs, a polarized primary electorate, and the possibility of losing anyway, and you know that stepping down could open up new professional opportunities, that's a rational choice. We also have to consider career pathways. For some politicians, Congress is not the end goal. It's a platform. Governors, mayors, cabinet officials, executive roles often offer more direct authority. In Congress, even senior members can find themselves stuck in gridlock. In an executive office, you can sign orders, implement programs, and shape policy more directly. So for ambitious figures, leaving Congress can be strategic, not retreat. But here's where it gets deeper. When experienced lawmakers leave in large numbers, Congress loses institutional memory. Legislative bodies rely on accumulated knowledge. Understanding procedural rules, budget mechanisms, diplomatic relationships, these aren't things you master overnight. They take years. If turnover accelerates, the balance of expertise can shift away from elected officials and toward permanent staff, lobbyists, and executive agencies. That subtly changes the center of gravity of power. It's not dramatic, it's gradual. But it matters. At the same time, the retirement wave opens doors for newcomers. Some observers see this as healthy renewal. If Congress is dysfunctional, maybe it needs fresh energy. Maybe entrenched career politicians are part of the problem. Maybe high turnover is a sign of democratic vitality, voters demanding change. That's one way to interpret it. But there's another possibility that the conditions of modern politics are discouraging. Precisely the kind of steady policy-oriented compromise-capable individuals who once stabilized the institution. If serving in Congress increasingly requires a tolerance for nonstop public combat, online outrage cycles, and ideological purity tests, then the pool of people willing to do the job may narrow. And that has consequences. We might see fewer long-term legislators and more short-term political entrepreneurs, fewer committee experts and more media personalities, fewer deal makers and more brand builders. That doesn't mean Congress will stop functioning, but it may function differently. There's also the question of public trust. When voters see lawmakers constantly leaving, it can reinforce the perception that Washington is broken. And when politicians themselves cite dysfunction, toxicity, or safety concerns as reasons for departure, that narrative deepens. Yet, it's important not to overstate the crisis. American political institutions have evolved before. The early republic had intense partisan battles. The late 19th century had machine politics and corruption scandals. The 20th century had ideological realignments. Institutions bend. They adapt. The question is whether Congress is adapting in a way that strengthens democratic governance, or in a way that gradually erodes its capacity. If the people most likely to leave are moderates and institutionalists, polarization may intensify. If the people most likely to stay are those comfortable in permanent campaign mode, the legislative branch may become even more performative. But if new entrants bring serious reform energy and genuine commitment to governance, turnover could revitalize the system. So which is it? The honest answer is, we don't know yet. What we do know is that politics today carries higher personal and reputational risk than it did a generation ago. It demands constant visibility, it invites constant scrutiny, and it offers uncertain rewards. For some, that's energizing. For others, it's draining. When dozens of lawmakers from both parties independently conclude that stepping away is the better option, that tells us something. It tells us that the cost-benefit calculation of public service has changed. It tells us that Washington is not just ideologically polarized, but culturally transformed. And it tells us that the traditional model of the career legislator, the person who spends decades mastering parliamentary procedure and building bipartisan trust, may be under pressure. This doesn't mean Congress is collapsing. It doesn't mean democracy is ending, but it does suggest we are in a transition. The American system was designed with the assumption that ambitious, capable individuals would view legislative service as a worthy long-term endeavor. If that assumption weakens, if Congress becomes a place people endure, briefly rather than commit to deeply, the character of the institution will inevitably shift. So when you hear that dozens of members are not seeking re-election, don't just see it as a headline about retirements. See it as a reflection of a broader question: who still wants to be a professional politician in America? And under what conditions? Because the future of Congress won't just be determined by elections. It will be determined by who decides the job is still worth doing. Thanks for watching.